Have you ever been called bad luck? Imagine losing your husband, your home, and being blamed for everything you never did. That's what happened to Sarah, a mother cast out into the freezing night with her little boy. No one would help them, until a stranger, a battle-scarred Marine, and his loyal German shepherd found them in the snow. What happened next? No one could have imagined. This isn't just a story about survival. It's about faith, forgiveness, and the miracles that still exist in this world when hearts choose kindness over hate. If you believe that God still works through people, this story will touch your soul. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video. Your support helps us spread more true stories of faith and hope. And may God bless everyone watching right now. The wind howled through the empty fields of Montana, carrying with it a biting cold that clawed at every inch of exposed skin. Snow fell in restless swirls, coating the broken fences and the narrow country road that led out of the small town of Meadow Ridge. It was the kind of winter that could swallow a person whole, leaving nothing but footprints and regrets behind. Along that lonely road, a woman and a small boy trudged forward through the snow, their silhouettes barely visible in the fading afternoon light. Sarah Miller was 30 years old, but looked older. Life had pressed its weight upon her. She was tall but thin, her frame fragile from weeks of worry and hunger. Her long chestnut hair was tangled beneath a faded gray scarf, and her pale skin, once soft and lively, was now roughened by wind and sorrow. Her brown eyes, once bright with hope, carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had lost nearly everything. The tattered coat she wore, stitched several times at the sleeves, barely held off the cold. She clutched the hand of her 7-year-old son, Ethan, as if letting go would mean losing the last piece of warmth left in her world. Ethan had his mother's eyes, wide, gentle, and searching for something he didn't fully understand. His small boots sank into the snow with every step, and his breath came out in white puffs. His hair, the color of golden wheat, peeked from under a wool hat too large for his head. Despite his age, he had already learned what silence meant. Silence from neighbors, from friends, from the town that once pretended to care. Every step away from that place was a small act of courage for a child who had seen more cruelty than kindness. Behind them, the faint outline of Meadow Ridge grew smaller, its church steeple disappearing behind the curtain of snow. The people there believed Sarah was cursed. They whispered that her husband's death had not been an accident, but fate's punishment, that she carried bad luck like a disease. A year ago, her husband, Mark Miller, had died in a mill explosion. He was a kind man, a mechanic who loved fixing old engines and humming to country songs at dinner. When the explosion took him, Sarah didn't just lose her husband. She lost her standing in a town that always needed someone to blame. The rumors began quietly at first, from doorsteps and church pews, but soon they became the only truth people wanted to hear. She cursed her man, they said, and that boy will grow up the same. When Sarah tried to find work again, no one would hire her. When Ethan came home crying from school, she held him close and whispered, "We'll leave, sweetheart. We'll find a place where people see us for who we are." That promise was the only thing keeping her moving now. The road ahead stretched endlessly through the snowfields, the sun sinking behind distant mountains. The wind grew sharper, slicing through her thin coat. Her boots were soaked, her feet numb. Every few minutes, Ethan would look up and ask, "Mom, are we almost there?" She would force a smile and say softly, "Soon, baby. We'll rest soon." But there was no there yet, only miles of snow and the heavy ache in her legs. By nightfall, the storm thickened. The air turned white with swirling snowflakes that blinded their way. Sarah's vision blurred. Her breath came in shallow gasps. The world around her was a blur of gray and white, and her thoughts began to drift. Memories of Mark came back. His smile, his calloused hands fixing the old pickup, the way he'd carry Ethan on his shoulders through the wheat fields. A sharp pain stung her chest. "Keep going," she whispered to herself, though her body screamed for rest. Ethan tugged at her coat. "Mom, I'm cold." She knelt beside him, brushing the snow from his lashes. "I know, honey. Just a little more." But when she stood again, her knees buckled, her vision dimmed. The edges of the world began to fade, and she collapsed into the snow. Ethan shouted, "Mom, wake up, Mom!" His small hands shook her shoulders, tears freezing on his cheeks. He didn't know where they were, only that his mother wasn't moving. He cried out again, his voice lost in the storm. The sound was swallowed by the wind, carried into the dark woods that lined the road. The boy's sobs grew quieter as exhaustion pulled at him. He wrapped his arms around Sarah, trying to keep her warm, whispering, "Please, Mom, don't leave me." Far in the distance, through the howling snow, a faint light flickered. A lantern swinging from the hand of a man walking with a dog by his side. The man's voice called out, deep and steady, though faint against the storm. The German shepherd beside him stopped suddenly, ears pricked, nose twitching. The man squinted through the snow but saw nothing yet. The dog barked once, sharp and certain. "What is it, boy?" the man said, pulling his coat tighter. The bark came again, and the dog took off toward the sound. The man followed, boots crunching through the ice. Ethan heard it first, the bark, deep and strong. He looked up to see a large shadow moving toward them. The dog's fur was thick, black and tan, dusted with snow. Its eyes were alert, intelligent and gentle all at once. It sniffed the air, then trotted closer, circling the two figures in the snow before barking again, louder this time. Ethan trembled, but didn't move. "It's okay, boy," he whispered, not knowing why he felt safe. The man appeared moments later, a broad figure wrapped in a heavy brown coat, a scarf hiding part of his weathered face. His eyes were a striking gray, the kind that had seen too much war and too little peace. He had a strong jaw, marked by a week's worth of beard, and a faint scar ran from his temple to his cheek. His name was Jack Thompson, a former Marine who had spent years overseas before returning to build a small vocational center for those who had nowhere else to go. Life had made him tough, but loss had made him kind. He knelt beside Sarah and checked her pulse. "She's still breathing," he muttered, relief flickering in his voice. He looked at the boy. "You did good, kid. What's your name?" Ethan sniffled. "Ethan. And that's my mom." Jack nodded. "All right, Ethan. Let's get you both out of this cold." He lifted Sarah effortlessly into his arms. Rex, the German shepherd, trotted beside them, tail low but steady, occasionally glancing back as if to make sure the boy kept up. The snowstorm continued to rage, but the light from Jack's lantern cut through the darkness, guiding them toward a small cabin in the distance. Inside, a fire crackled, and warmth spilled into the room as Jack carried Sarah inside and laid her on the couch. Ethan followed, clutching his small backpack. Rex curled near the fire, eyes watchful, ears twitching with every sound. Jack covered Sarah with a blanket and turned to the boy. "She'll be fine, son. She just needs rest." Ethan nodded silently, staring at the dog by the fire. Jack smiled faintly. "That's Rex. He's got a nose for people who need help. The boy managed a small smile before his eyes drooped with exhaustion. Jack poured water into a tin cup, placed it beside the couch, and looked at the two figures, mother and son, fragile but strong in their own way. Outside, the storm began to calm, and the moonlight spilled across the frozen ground. Inside, for the first time in weeks, Sarah and Ethan were safe. And though they didn't yet know it, this night would mark the beginning of a new life, one that would test their courage, heal their wounds, and show them that kindness could still bloom even in the coldest winter. The first thing Sarah noticed when she opened her eyes was the warmth. It wasn't the cold bite of wind anymore, but the steady glow of firelight flickering against wooden walls. She blinked slowly, her head heavy and her throat dry. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, only the endless snow, Ethan's frightened cries, and then darkness. Then she heard it. The low, steady breathing of her son sleeping beside her, and the soft crackle of burning logs. A German shepherd lay curled by the fire, its chest rising and falling rhythmically. Its fur gleamed amber and black under the light, ears twitching slightly, as if even in sleep it was alert to every sound. Sarah sat up slowly, confusion and relief mixing within her. "Easy there," a voice said from the corner of the room. It was deep, calm, and carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. The man stepped into the light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of rugged strength that came from years of labor and loss. His gray eyes were sharp but not unkind, framed by lines that hinted at both laughter long gone and battles fought too many times. A faint scar ran along his left cheek, disappearing into the silver stubble of his beard. He wore a faded flannel shirt and heavy work boots dusted with snow. "You passed out in the storm," he said simply. "My dog found you." Sarah's lips parted, her voice barely a whisper. "You saved us?" He shrugged slightly, pulling up a chair near the fire. "Rex did most of the work. I just followed his lead." The dog, hearing his name, lifted its head and wagged its tail once before resting it back down. Sarah glanced at her son. "Ethan, he was so scared. I didn't think anyone would come." Jack Thompson, for that was his name, nodded. "Storms like that don't forgive much. You were lucky we were out hunting." He stirred the fire with a poker, sending sparks upward. "You're safe now. This is the haven, my place. It's about 10 miles from Meadow Ridge." Sarah froze at the mention of her old town, her stomach twisting. "We left Meadow Ridge," she murmured, almost ashamed to say it aloud. Jack gave her a knowing look but didn't pry. "You can rest here until you figure out your next step," he said. "You and the boy." The next morning, sunlight filtered through the frosted window. Ethan woke first, his eyes wide as he saw Rex lying beside the bed. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, reaching out. Rex's tail thumped against the floorboards, and he nudged his nose into the boy's hand. A laugh escaped Ethan's lips, the first real laugh since his father's death. Sarah watched, her heart aching but also softening. Jack entered carrying a tray of oatmeal and coffee. "Morning. You look better." His tone was gruff, but there was a trace of warmth behind it. "Eat up. You'll need your strength." Over breakfast, Sarah learned more about him. Jack had served 20 years in the Marines, deployed to places he rarely spoke of. When he came home, he found his wife and daughter had died in a car crash while he was overseas. That loss had hollowed him out, and for years he drifted, until he decided to build the Haven. It started as a small workshop for veterans, teaching carpentry and mechanical repair, but grew into a community where anyone down on their luck could learn a trade. People need a purpose, Jack said quietly, staring into his coffee. Gives them a reason to keep breathing. Sarah nodded, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. You help a lot of people, don't you? Jack shrugged. Helps me too. He glanced at her with a faint smile. Everyone here's trying to fix something. Broken hands, broken hearts, doesn't matter which. Later, he took them outside to show the small compound. A few wooden cabins, a large barn-turned workshop, and a fenced garden buried under snow. The air was crisp but calmer now. Sarah breathed deeply, the smell of pine and smoke reminding her that not all places were cruel. Ethan ran ahead with Rex trotting beside him, both leaving tracks in the snow. He likes your boy, Jack said. That dog doesn't take to strangers easily. Sarah smiled faintly. Ethan's always loved animals, maybe because they never judge. Jack looked at her for a long moment, as though he understood exactly what she meant. Then he said, You can stay here a while if you want. Work a bit, help around the place. No one here will ask where you came from. Sarah hesitated. I don't want to be a burden. Don't worry about that, he replied. We all pull our weight here. You'll find something to do. That night, as Ethan and Rex slept near the fire, Sarah sat quietly by the window. The storm had passed, leaving the sky full of stars. Jack worked late in the workshop, his silhouette visible through the frosted glass. She thought of how his eyes seemed tired yet kind, how Rex had found them when the world turned its back. For the first time in months, she felt something she didn't dare name: hope. When Jack finally came in, brushing snow from his shoulders, he paused beside her. You're thinking too much, he said. She smiled weakly. It's hard not to when you've lost everything. Jack nodded. I know the feeling. But you didn't lose everything, Sarah. You've still got that boy. And that's more than most. He turned toward the fire. Get some rest. Tomorrow, you can help me with the kitchen repairs. Keeps the hands busy, and the mind follows. Sarah watched him for a long while after he disappeared into his room. She whispered a quiet thank you to the silent night. Outside, Rex lifted his head from the rug, ears twitching as if he understood her words. Then he laid it back down, and the firelight danced gently across the walls of the haven. A small sanctuary where 3 souls, once broken by life, had unknowingly begun to mend. Morning came softly over the haven, sunlight filtering through the mist that clung to the pine-covered hills of Montana. The snow from last week's storm had settled into a quiet white blanket, reflecting light through every frosted window. Sarah stood by the kitchen counter, sleeves rolled up, her long chestnut hair tied into a messy braid. The smell of baked bread filled the air. For the first time in months, she wasn't just surviving, she was part of something. Ethan's laughter echoed faintly from outside, mixing with the steady rhythm of hammering from the workshop. The sound reminded her of life itself, imperfect, loud, and somehow comforting. Jack had gone out early, his heavy coat dusted with frost when he returned with a small group of people. "We got new arrivals," he called out, his voice rough but welcoming. "Sarah, can you help set up a warm meal?" She nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. Through the doorway stepped 3 figures, 2 men and 1 teenage girl. They looked cold, worn, but hopeful in that fragile way people do when life has given them another chance. The first man, Tom Reynolds, was around 40, tall and lean, his beard unkempt and eyes sunken but alert. He had once been a construction worker before a workplace accident left him partially deaf in one ear. The world had turned quiet for him, and in that silence, he had lost his family. Jack had met him months earlier at a veterans gathering and invited him to the Haven. Tom rarely spoke, but when he did, it was in slow, careful words, as though he weighed each one for truth. Beside him was Grace, a 16-year-old girl with dark curls and olive skin, wrapped in a coat far too large for her. Her mother had passed away the year before, and she had wandered from foster home to foster home. Jack had taken her in after finding her sleeping behind the local church. She was quick with her hands, curious, and carried a spark that reminded Sarah painfully of herself when she was younger, before grief had hardened her heart. The last was Mrs. Peterson, a small, round woman in her late 50s who volunteered twice a week. Her gray hair was always tied in a bun, and her thick glasses often slid down her nose as she worked. She was the kind of woman who called everyone dear, and always smelled faintly of cinnamon and soap. Mrs. Peterson helped teach sewing to the women who came to the Haven, and when she smiled, her entire face softened like warm dough. That afternoon, Sarah taught Grace how to mend a torn coat. "You don't fix it all at once," she explained, her needle moving through the fabric with gentle precision. "You start with one small stitch, then another. Before you know it, the hole's gone, but the thread still shows, to remind you it was broken once." Grace nodded, eyes focused. "Like people," she said quietly. Sarah smiled. "Exactly like people." From the workshop outside, the hum of saws and the clang of tools filled the air. Ethan played with Rex, throwing a stick near the barn. The German shepherd, his fur gleaming gold and black under the sun, bounded after it with unshakable energy. When Ethan fell laughing into the snow, Rex nudged him upright with his nose and barked playfully. Jack watched from the porch, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. For all his sternness, there was a gentleness to the man when he looked at the boy and his mother, something in him softening that he thought was long gone. Later, as evening fell, the group gathered in the main hall. The fire glowed brightly, and the room filled with quiet chatter. Jack spoke a few words to everyone, as he often did at the end of the day. "We've all been through storms," he said, his voice steady. "But storms pass. What matters is what we build after." He raised his mug slightly, and the others nodded in silent agreement. Sarah felt the warmth of his words seep into her, stitching something unseen inside her heart. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Sarah sat by the window with a pile of old blankets. The seams were torn, the fabric worn thin. She began to sew, her fingers trembling slightly from the chill, but her expression was calm. With each thread she pulled through, memories of her past flickered. Mark's laughter, the cruel words of Meadow Ridge, Ethan's tears in the storm. She wasn't erasing those memories. She was weaving them into something stronger. Jack passed by quietly, stopping in the doorway. "You never stop working," he said softly. Sarah looked up and smiled faintly. "Maybe I just don't want to stop feeling useful." Jack nodded, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "You are," he said simply. "You and that boy. You remind this place why it exists." Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and silent. Rex lifted his head and gave a low, contented sigh before settling back down beside the fire. The Haven glowed like a beacon in the dark wilderness, part refuge, part rebirth. And in that small pocket of warmth, where broken souls gathered and learned to heal, Sarah Miller finally began to believe that life could be kind again. The wind had returned to the valley with a vengeance. It howled across the open fields surrounding the haven, rattling the windows and pushing snow against the cabin walls like a living force. The trees bent under its power, their branches snapping in the dark. Inside, the fire burned low, casting long shadows across the room where Sarah sat mending a torn jacket. Jack had gone out to check the traps before the storm worsened, and Rex had followed him earlier to patrol the edge of the forest. Ethan, now comfortable in his new home, sat near the window tracing frost patterns with his finger. He had grown more confident since coming here, his laughter returning, but that night his eyes carried worry. "Mom," he asked, his small voice breaking the wind's roar, "why isn't Rex back yet?" Sarah glanced toward the door, her needle pausing mid-air. "He'll come back soon, sweetheart. You know how clever he is." But deep down, unease tightened her chest. The hours dragged on. Jack returned first, his coat thick with snow, a lantern swinging from his hand. "No sign of him," he said, his brows furrowed beneath his wool hat. "He's trained to come back before dark." He set the lantern on the table, its glow trembling in the draft. Ethan jumped up. "We have to find him." Jack placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "The storm's getting bad, son. We'll go in the morning if he doesn't return." But Ethan shook his head, eyes wide. "He's out there alone." Before anyone could stop him, he bolted for the door. "Ethan!" Sarah shouted, rushing after him, but the boy was already swallowed by the storm. The wind tore her voice away. Jack grabbed his coat again, cursing under his breath, and followed her out. Snowflakes hit their faces like shards of glass. Visibility was nearly zero, the world reduced to white chaos. Sarah's breath came in ragged bursts. "He's just a child," she cried. Jack nodded grimly. "Then we'd better find him fast." They pushed through the forest path, the lantern light barely cutting through the storm. The snow crunched underfoot, covering their tracks as soon as they made them. Sarah's heart pounded, her mind racing with fear and guilt. Each gust of wind felt like the world punishing her again, for staying, for hoping, for letting her guard down. "Ethan!" she screamed, voice hoarse. There was no answer. Jack moved methodically, scanning the ground for footprints. Years of military training had taught him how to read chaos. He spotted a faint trail, small prints leading deeper into the woods. "This way!" he yelled. Sarah stumbled after him, clutching her scarf tightly. The cold burned her lungs. They walked for what felt like hours until a faint sound pierced through the storm. A bark, weak but distinct. Sarah's eyes widened. "Rex!" she called. The barking came again, followed by a small, desperate voice. "Mom! Over here!" They ran, toward the sound, snow crunching under their boots, until the lantern light caught a flash of movement. Ethan was crouched beside Rex, whose paw was caught in a rusty steel trap half buried in snow. The boy was trying to pry it open with trembling hands, his cheeks red from cold, tears frozen on his lashes. "He's hurt, Mom," Ethan sobbed. "I couldn't leave him." Sarah dropped to her knees beside them, her breath catching at the sight of the blood-stained snow. Rex whined softly, his eyes flicking toward her with trust, not pain. Jack knelt on the other side, his hands steady even as the wind whipped around them. "Hold him still," he said. He pulled out a small hunting knife and worked the frozen mechanism loose. The trap snapped open, and Rex yelped once before pulling his leg free. Jack tore a strip of cloth from his coat and wrapped it around the wound. "Good boy," he murmured, his voice low and full of warmth. "You did good, soldier." Sarah gathered Ethan into her arms, her tears falling onto his hat. "You scared me," she whispered, her voice shaking. Ethan clung to her, burying his face in her coat. "I just didn't want him to die, Mom. He saved us once." Her heart broke open with love and realization. In that moment, she understood that her son's courage came not from fearlessness, but from love, the same love she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Jack helped her to her feet. "We need to move," he said. "The storm's getting worse." He lifted Rex into his arms, the dog's weight solid but trusted. The four of them began the long trek back, wind biting and snow blinding. Sarah stumbled more than once, but Jack's hand was always there to steady her. The lantern flickered like a heartbeat in the darkness, a fragile symbol of persistence. By the time they reached the haven, dawn had begun to break. The snow was lighter now, and the world glowed in hues of gold and silver. Inside, Jack laid Rex by the fire, checking his bandage. Sarah wrapped Ethan in blankets, holding him close as he drifted into exhausted sleep. Jack glanced at her across the room, his expression softening. "He's brave," he said quietly. Sarah looked at her sleeping boy and smiled faintly. "He takes after the people who saved him." Outside, the storm faded into silence, leaving only the peaceful sound of wind whispering through the trees. For the first time, Sarah didn't feel cursed. She felt alive and grateful. The haven wasn't just a refuge from the cold anymore. It was where she learned that courage wasn't about strength or survival. It was about love and the will to protect it, no matter the storm. Spring unfolded slowly over Montana, melting the last of the snow that had once buried the valley in silence. The frozen river beside the haven now flowed freely, its water glinting beneath the morning sun. The air smelled of pine and new beginnings. Birds returned to the trees, and the world that had been muted by winter came alive again with sound and color. Sarah stood outside the workshop, her slender frame outlined by the golden light. Her long chestnut hair, now neatly trimmed, fluttered gently in the breeze. She wore a denim apron over her faded blue dress, her hands busy pinning fabric to a wooden mannequin. Her once frail appearance had softened into quiet strength. There was confidence in the way she moved, in the calm patience that had replaced her fear. Inside the haven, life had changed. New faces filled the rooms, young men and women learning carpentry, mechanics, and tailoring. Jack had expanded the program over the months, and word had spread across nearby towns. The center had become more than just a shelter. It was a community where broken people found purpose again. Jack Thompson, though still the same broad-shouldered Marine with sharp gray eyes and the roughness of old battle scars, seemed lighter now. The furrow in his brow had eased. He often spent mornings in the garden with Ethan, showing him how to plant seeds in the thawed soil. "Patience, kid," he'd say, pressing a seed into the earth. "Everything worth growing takes time." Ethan, now 8, had grown stronger and taller. His golden hair gleamed under the sun, and his laughter carried through the compound. He loved tending the small patch of flowers near the porch, his idea of giving Rex a garden to protect. The German shepherd, his injured leg long healed, followed Ethan faithfully, his fur shimmering with health. At night, Rex would lie near the steps, watching the sunset as though guarding not just the boy, but the peace they had all built together. Sarah had taken on the role of sewing instructor for newcomers. Among her students was Lydia Morgan, a woman in her 30s with auburn hair tied in a loose bun. Her hands bore small scars from years of working in a factory, and her eyes, soft green but shadowed, spoke of struggle. Lydia had fled an abusive marriage, and though she spoke little, she listened with intensity. Sarah taught her to mend, to measure, to believe her hands could create something beautiful again. Every stitch is a second chance, Sarah told her, echoing Jack's wisdom in her own way. Jack noticed the change in Sarah. He often watched from the workshop doorway as she guided her students, her smile patient but sincere. In her presence, the atmosphere around the haven had warmed. One afternoon, he said quietly, "You've done something here, Sarah. You've given this place a heart." She blushed slightly, brushing dust from her apron. "No," she replied. "You gave it a home. We just filled it with life." As spring deepened, the haven prepared for its first open house. Jack's idea to let the local community see the work being done and to encourage others to join or support the cause. People from nearby towns arrived in pickup trucks and old sedans, carrying food, tools, and warm smiles. The once isolated compound now buzzed with chatter, laughter, and music from an old radio Jack had fixed himself. Amid the crowd, Sarah was helping set up a table of handmade quilts when she heard a hesitant voice behind her. "Sarah? Sarah Miller?" She froze. Turning slowly, she saw a man she hadn't seen since Meadow Ridge. It was Henry Walker, an older farmer with a weathered face, deep lines carved from years under the sun. His cap was pulled low, and guilt flickered in his tired blue eyes. I thought it was you," he said, voice trembling. "I heard about this place and wanted to see it for myself. I didn't know how to say this, but I was wrong." Sarah's heart raced. Memories of whispers, of doors closing, of her and Ethan being driven away by hatred flooded her mind. Henry stepped closer, his rough hands twisting his hat. "We all were," he continued. "We listened to lies, blamed you for things we didn't understand. When your husband died, the town needed someone to blame. I should have stood up for you. I'm sorry." His voice cracked. "You and your boy deserved better." For a long moment, Sarah couldn't speak. Then she placed her hand gently on his arm. "You don't need to carry that anymore," she said softly. "We found our peace. I hope you find yours too." Henry's eyes welled up as he nodded. "Looks like you already found something better than forgiveness," he murmured before walking away. Jack, who had watched the exchange from a distance, approached quietly. "You handled that with grace," he said. Sarah looked toward the sunset. "Forgiveness isn't for them," she said. "It's for us, to let the past stop owning us." Jack smiled faintly. Maybe that's the miracle we all came here looking for. As the day ended, the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in streaks of orange and rose. The residents of the haven gathered on the roof, where the view stretched across the valley. Ethan sat beside Rex, his arm draped around the dog's neck. Sarah stood next to Jack, the wind lifting her hair. For a moment, no one spoke. The world felt whole, fragile, and infinite. Jack's deep voice broke the silence, soft but sure. "We started this place to fix what was broken. Turns out it fixed us too." Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening with tears she didn't wipe away. Together they watched the horizon, where light met shadow, proof that even after the darkest winter, spring would always come again. Sometimes, God's miracles don't arrive as lightning in the sky or voices from above. They come quietly, through people who choose kindness when it's hardest. Sarah, Jack, Ethan, and Rex all carried their own pain, but it was love, not luck, that saved them. It was the unseen grace of God working through simple acts, a hand reaching out in a storm, a heart choosing to forgive, a stranger offering shelter. In our everyday lives, we all walk through storms. Maybe yours isn't snow or wind, but loneliness, loss, or fear. Yet every time you choose compassion instead of anger, forgiveness instead of hate, or hope instead of despair, that is a miracle. That's God reminding you He never left. He's still here, working through you, guiding your steps, sending help in the form of people you might never expect. So if you're watching this story, take a moment to reflect. Who has been your Jack or your Sarah? Who has reached out when you were lost? And more importantly, who can you be that miracle for today? May God bless you and everyone watching this video. May He fill your heart with kindness, strength, and the courage to love even in the hardest times. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us what part moved you most, and subscribe to our channel so we can keep spreading more stories of faith, love, and second chances. Because when we share kindness, we don't just tell stories, we create miracles.